just so you're aware, we are recording this session. It's going to go out on the internet possibly at some point in the future. Hope everyone's fit and well. Hopefully you're all doing okay in the lockdown. Getting some good thumbs up, which is great. I'm sure you're all aware, Sutton and Cheam are doing a net every Monday night. So during this lockdown, we've been doing a net Monday nights on GB3XP at 8 PM. We've had some good attendance on that recently, so that's great. If anyone wants to join us 8 o'clock GB3XP repeater, then the more the merrier. This is the first time we've tried to do this sort of thing on Zoom. Obviously, the lockdown's gone on for a bit longer than perhaps we were expecting or hoping. We've been told by the football club we're going to be closed until at least July. So this maybe a few of these sessions via Zoom. We're going to try and get things teed up, get our program back on track, but doing this sort of format rather than face to face, until we're allowed to get back together again. I won't bother with the health and safety talk tonight. We all know where the toilets are in your own house and where the fire exits are, so that's fine. We are joined tonight by members of some of our sister clubs. So we've got members of Cats, members of Dorking, and members of Crystal Palace on the call tonight. So that's nice to have you guys on, and welcome to you all. One of the things that we're looking at in Sutton and Cheam is the RSGB have announced something called the Beyond Exams programme. So I just sort of mentioned that start of the meeting. If anyone's interested in getting involved in that, either to learn a bit more if you just pass your test, or want to help others that have perhaps a bit more experience, then please let me know. Anyway, Martin, I'm going to hand it over to you. If you've got anything you want to say, you might have to go off mute. Hopefully you can do that yourself. Is it letting you take? There you go. Cool.
I should be off mute.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, well, good to have as many people as we have, as Chris said, in the nicest possible way. Great to have our sister clubs joining us, and this is what amateur radio is about. Unfortunately, I'm stuck in the wife's craft room because she's downstairs where I normally use the computer, so I've got all her craft junk behind me. But hey, what the hell. I've known Frank probably for about 7 or 8 years now, is it, Frank?
Probably so.
Yeah, probably so. Frank joined us on a podcast for a long time, then took a little bit of an outage and came back. Frank and I are known within the podcasting community on ICQ as the naughty toddlers. So I'm not sure who leads who astray, but I'm blaming Frank because he's older than me.
I think either one of us needs leadership.
Yeah. But no. Guys, Frank's a great speaker. Very interesting to talk to him, and we're great to have you. And thanks, Frank, for doing an extra one for us. I really appreciate it. I may have to get away about 9 o'clock because I'm up at stupid o'clock tomorrow morning. So if I duck out before the end, Frank, it's not because I'm not interested. It's just difficult.
I understand.
As far as I'm concerned, everything's ticking along normally. So back to you, Chris, to host it.
Thanks, Martin. So, as you've all seen, we've got Frank on the call. Frank is, to give his proper title, Professor Frank Howell, K4FMH. Frank is a Professor of Sociology, retired, I believe now, at Mississippi State University. So Frank's going to give us a talk about the futures of amateur radio. So it should be a bit of a thought-provoking one, I think. If anyone's got any questions, we'll perhaps do those at the end. I'll unmute everyone at the end. If you've got any questions, perhaps you can let me know in the chat window and I can unmute you to ask him at the end if that's okay. So Frank, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Very good. Well, thank you for being here, those of you who are there. And I want to tell you very sincerely, it's a great honor to be asked by any group of hands to meet or visit electronically, share some thoughts, and I take that very seriously. I've been a professor for about 45 years, but you would never know it that I was too shy to enter a room of a number of people when I was a child. When I went into broadcasting before I went to graduate school, I think realizing that 10,000 people were listening to you stutter through the news at 9 a.m. sort of cured me of that. So this is something I've told Chris before, that if he couldn't get a good speaker, that I would stand in until he could get one. And I think I had Bob Howell lined up, and something fell out of the wayside with Bob's schedule. So anytime I'm able to help get a good speaker, I'll be happy to do that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some things tonight that I want you to pay particular attention to the word future, There's an S on it. And I sort of make the pitch, the futures of amateur radio, a sociologist Ham's perspective. And I'll share some ideas, and we can kind of talk a little bit about that. Next slide. Let me give you an idea, because I don't like to leave a group hanging. Let me give you a quick overview of where we are, so you don't feel like you're captured by PowerPoint. Here are the main bullet points. There are many futures. It's like Schrodinger and that cat's dead or alive. Well, there are many futures. How should we future, which is what one group calls thinking about the future. Now, we all think about the future. What am I going to have for dinner tomorrow? But this is an organized way to think about forecasting the future. So how should we go about that? When we get to the future, it's always relevant to know what's our past. And I'll give about an 8-mile-high view of some relevant history of amateur radio that at least I think is relevant for us to think about where we are today. And in how we organize, we often think about individuals, but the groups that we're in, such as the group that we have now, they are really the key components, if you will, for amateur radio. Yeah, individuals come and go, but you know, those organizations, and they come and go too, but they are key components there. And there are forces within amateur radio that will provoke change, and there are forces outside or without of amateur radio. And recently on an episode of the ICQ podcast, Dr. Kamal Singh, former member of the RSGB, and I am a member, have been for a number of years, and thoroughly enjoy being a member from across the pond. He was a board member. He had to resign because of some business activity he got into. But Dr. Singh gave a eloquent talk at RSGB. It was maybe a couple of years ago, when Martin and Chris also had one about clubs. And I call that the Singh prophecy, not to overdress it, but it's the Singh prophecy. And I want to talk about what he said briefly, and then add my own compliment to that of some things I think may enhance what he has to say, because it's really worth watching. And then finally, to understand the hobby as how we future and think about our future in amateur radio. And I'll identify at the very end one future I think is very, very bright. So as Hugh Grant said, whether it's a bad thing or not, I don't know, but there you have it. So if you have the next slide, let's begin. Well, we often talk, as if there's just one future, and sometimes we've had oracles. If you watch that series on the Vikings that was on a couple of years ago, there was this blind person who had his eyes put out with fiery embers, but yet he could tell the future. And so very often we think about the future as if someone can divine the future and they've got some mystic way of understanding it. But that's not really what I'm talking about. That may work for, is the sun going to rise in the east tomorrow? And I think we can all get behind that one and be pretty accurate. When we think about non-physical objects, social change, here's point one, it's dynamic. Models of the future are dynamic. Take the COVID-19 pandemic. Why are all the models changing? Chris Murray in the state of Washington here in the States gave a pretty good model of what the news media didn't understand. And at one time I was in broadcast news and have worked with them to keep them from doing things like take 1% of 1% and get kind of stupid mathematically. So I'm kind of R1, if you will. But they didn't understand that's not, today I'm forecasting several to model he was using. Each day it was updated, so it's a step ahead forecast. And what's changing it? Individual human behavior, where they wear masks, stay socially distant, etc. So models of the future tend to be dynamic. Now, if we just said we could look at a dipole and tell if it's resonant or not, some of us may have built, that doesn't include me, I can't do that. But some of us may feel confident, hey, a 20-meter dipole, I can kind of look at it and tell you if the length's right because I've built 100 of them. Well, but in general, we don't agree that we can look at a dipole antenna and tell if it's resonant or not. What do? We take measurements. So in the World Future Society is the professional organization that studies scientific forecasts of social change. And they use the concept of futuring, how to future. So here's the punchline. There are many futures, and our knowledge of behavior and technology changes how we organize, how we act, and ultimately the future itself. And one element of what you're doing here tonight, multiple clubs joining together, is one of those actions and how we organize that can change the future. So let's go to the next slide. Now, how should we future? Well, let me ask, what's the fundamental nature of amateur radio? When we read our magazines and listen on the air, you know, it's often bandied about, you know, we're a technical hobby. Well, okay, we focus on technology, but imagine these two, and I've tried to put this into context of the United Kingdom. So if I get any vernacular wrong, please forgive me. I'm a wayward child of the British Empire. So chemist, two guys are having a pint in a pub, and a chemist walks in, and the chemist says, "Oh, I see, you're practicing chemistry." They look at him very oddly and say, "No, we're just having a friendly chat. You fancy a Guinness?" Well, who's right? I think one could make the argument, no, they are practicing chemistry. They're using chemicals in a beer or an ale. But I think most of us would also say, no, it's social behavior, and it involves chemistry. And I liken that to amateur radio. It's a technology-focused way to pass the time, but it's social behavior at its base, just like golf is, just like fishing is, just like soccer is, just like a lot of things. So next slide. And because it's social behavior, we need to think about what are those principles. You know, we take exams, and if we like building things, we study circuit design, and we learn what are some of the phenomena that we've figured out, and it changes somewhat over time. But you know, Ohm's law and Puchert's law about power and a number of things like that. Well, let's think about some of those similar kinds of phenomena that's important for us in amateur radio. Often we lament how individuals are for social change. If individuals would just straighten up, it's not like it used to be. If we can fix individuals, we can fix our hobby or anything else, really, our local town, what have you. But the problem is individuals get the way they are because of social organization and how the hobby is organized. It's that organization which invariably teaches individual hams the culture and shapes their view of the hobby. We have a term for it called Elmering. It's more than technology training. If you want to start a fist fight in that bar, say, here's the only way you should ground your station. I promise a fight will break out sooner or later, particularly if there's beer. How do you solder on a PL 259? You get, how did we individually learn that? Very often we get taught the culture of the technology from our Elmer or Elmers. And so that likely we don't get taught the overall culture of the hobby. We get taught a subculture, the niche that your Elmer or Elmers tend to focus on. So technology doesn't, here's another punchline, technology doesn't exist in a social vacuum. Each changes the other. And you know, we've argued for years. When I taught philosophy of science, I used to come in one lecture with a lab coat, because you know, I'm a scientist. I got a lab coat. We've got these universal laws. And you know what's happened since we've sent missiles and things out into space? We find that some of those laws that we thought were immutable here on the Earth work a little differently. We've got that big thing over in Europe, going to try to find the magic particle to figure out how that works. So we're not different in thinking about this in terms of social science. We learned that technology affects the social, and the social affects the technology. I won't ask for a show of hands, but how many of you build your current favorite rig? How many of you have built it? Some of you might. Some of you might got might have gotten some assistance from Asher Forehand for BidX to help build it. Hans Summers. Well, why don't we do that? The technology has changed, and we typically don't have the understanding and the technical ability to design and build many of those things. But back in the early days, most people did. And you still hear today some of our graybeard Elmer saying, that's real ham radio. We're going to get into real ham radio with the next slide. Now, let's think about how we got where we are today. Now, the origins of amateur radio were organic. That is, it was from the ground up. Many individuals were experimenting and sharing info. We didn't have a cultural template for how to do ham radio. No RSGB, no ARL, and there really weren't that many organized groups. One of the little side projects, I once had a laboratory. I never got over it. So I used to have a white marker board in my lab, and I would always have the to-do list literally on my drawing board. And one of the things I have in studying amateur radio is I've gone back in the U.S. I'd be interested to know if you have this in the United Kingdom. I've got all the original call lists and where they were licensed. And I'm going to go back to the very first licenses given by the FCC, and I'm going to put them on maps. And I want to see where they started and where they sprang up. I wonder if where amateur radio in the U.S. started has active clubs today. If we use that logic, where would they all start? Would it all start in Dayton, because that's the biggest club in the United States. So it was organic. It was hams deciding to get together. Well, what was our original transmission mode? Well, it was CW, Morse code. Now, the culture around early ham radio reflected that technology, but it also reflected the organic organization around the mode of transmission and that mode of operation. The concept of the crystal. We didn't have a VFO then. You got crystals. Sometimes you would scrape them a little bit to change the frequency. You trade and barter them. They do that with baseball cards or perhaps cricket cards if you have those and that kind of thing. So that was the technology shaping that culture. Later came AM voice transmission, followed by those silly sidebanders, or as I learned at 8 years of age, listening on a big piece of furniture in my grandmother's living room. You didn't go in the living room unless somebody died or you had company. And I got her permission to go in her living room as a small child and listen to her RCA radio. It had the green winking eye. You tuned it in and winked at you. And I heard these people, and I could never tune them in. It had no BFO. Well, they were typically called mushmouths by the AM operators. Did you have that in the United Kingdom? Chris, you can give me an up or down.
Did we have a what, sorry, Frank?
Did you have a controversy back in history when sideband came in? Did the AMers really put down the sidebanders?
I believe so. Martin will be able to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that was the case, Martin, wasn't it? You told me this before. I think Martin's on mute, but
yeah, and so what is that? That's not the technology. That's not the technology doing that. That's us. We're doing that because we've adapted our culture around the technology. Now, since then, yeah.
Yeah, just quickly, because Chris has just unmuted me. Sideband happened, I believe, because it was before I was in the hobby, around about the early 60s. And I remember talking to an early G3, and he said to me, Martin, I used to be a bad boy in the hobby. He said, because I was working SSB when everybody was on AM and they hated me. You know,
it's almost as bad as Citizens Band. It wasn't, not quite, but almost. Right. So you see the culture that emerged, and when we had these different modes that came about, we had people who distinguished themselves. I'm an AM. I'm a CW person. This sideband is terrific. The culture became more complex, but we did not become more pluralistic and accepting of these different groups in terms of our social norms. Hams begin to specialize. Now, that's not unusual in a growing hobby. It happens in many hobbies. you have specialties. And in many sciences today, if you said, I'm a physicist, I'm a chemist, I'm a biologist, I'm a sociologist, I'm a statistician, the next question, if you're talking to a fellow practitioner of that, is, yeah, okay, so you're a physicist, but what do you do? Oh, I'm an astrophysicist. Oh, then what do you do? Oh, I study quasars and gamma ray bursts. Oh, now I know what you do. And that's also the kind of thing that I think that we have gone through. So it is not unusual, but it has longer term consequences when we specialize without adopting pluralism as one of our values. And we haven't done that. Next slide. So we have a very, today, we have a very diverse and growing set of transmission modes. And what do we hear, at least over here in the States? That Joe Taylor, he can take that Nobel Prize in physics, and, well, I won't say what you can hear him, they say he can do it. With FT8 is running amateur radio. It's got nothing to do with the technology. It's got to do with our culture. So groups of hams often make claims. And if you don't think that history I just talked about isn't real or isn't present, let's walk through this. There are claims that different groups of hams make that some activities are more true to what amateur radio is than others. Well, this isn't unique to amateur radio. It isn't technology. It's social behavior. And it's tradition that can inspire us. Here in the States, I'm a flunky for the ARL. I'm an assistant director of one of the divisions covering 4 states of Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee. So I are one at way down the food chain. But we really brag on this guy who invented the Gatling gun. And oh, by the way, Hiram Percy Maxim also started the Amateur Radio Relay League. And we really put him up as the end all and be all, except when he used the phrase 73s with apostrophe S, because that's also part of the claim today. That's not accurate. Martin, Chris, I'm on the case. I'm talking to the American Linguistic Society. I want to get to the bottom of the 73 or 73s, but more to come on that later. But I just want to sort of bring that out. And I'm ignorant about the RSGB, United Kingdom, and the analogs. You hopefully can identify some of those. But when we have tradition that inspires us, if we take it too far, it can stifle our hobby, because then it becomes ritualism. And I dare say there are many nets. Thanks, Stuart, I appreciate that. But we'll see. That 73 versus 73s is just like telling people there's one way to ground your station. A fist fight will break out in the pub. We're going to see what people who study linguistics says about that. Now, when it becomes ritualism for nets, for example, my club has a net. We have gone away from our emergency format, our Aries net here in the United States, to just a club net. We've tried to have a topic of the week. What's your favorite HF rig? Or what have you done? You know, we come up with these ideas. We've done that 6 months, and most of the people just want to check in. I got no comment. I'm on battery power. Boom, got it. Well, we've changed that, or tried to change it, but the culture won't let us, you know, and so that's what I'm getting at. Ritualism is when we practice something based on tradition, but it doesn't have much meaning any longer, and yet we hold on to it with all our might. And, you know, and so some of these vestiges of what I'm kind of joking here about, this change really keeps us from integrating from everyone into the hobby. The rate of change, as the hobby has changed based upon technical diversity and specialization, the rate of change is such like I can't keep up. I have to specialize because I can't learn about A, B, and C when back in the earlier days, a ham knew all ham radio. So this rate of change keeps integration of people into the hobby at a lower point. And it creates social diversity and a lack of integration into common culture. Well, how does that work? We play around here with 73s, and you know that's one that's pretty common. But if you talk, I don't know if anybody's into satellites and Earth, Moon, Earth bounce, but let's just assume that nobody in this group would be. And if I came out with my chitter chatter with all the little acronyms and terms of Earth, Moon, Earth bounce, if you didn't practice it, you say, well, what's that guy saying? What's he talking about? See, we have this terminology. We have specialized groups. We have specialized media outlets and so forth, to the point that many hams say, I don't care about reading QST or Redcom. There's only one thing in that for me that's of interest. Oh, wait a minute, I thought you were a ham. That gets back to the physicist, and you don't know what he or she does till you find out he studies gamma ray burst. We specialized ourselves out of a certain sense of commonality. Now I want to go to the next slide. I want to talk about how this social circuit works. Now, how does that work? Martin says this will be on the test whenever y'all get it. So just joking, just kidding. Yeah, been a professor, it takes a while to rub off. Now, what's our tolerance for social change when we become more diverse technologically? We haven't done that well on that. It varies. Now, has that technological change changed our use of technology collectively? How many of you do a little bit of it all? I'm going to say there are more specialists than there are generalists. And I'm not saying that everybody should be a generalist. You know, I go to a general practitioner as a surgeon or as a doctor, you know, every 6 months to check my health. But he very quickly routes me over to a urologist if I'm having a problem there, or a kidney doctor, or a liver doctor if my enzymes aren't right, or what have you. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with specialization. It simply has consequences if we don't have tolerance for one another. Here's an equation.
Hello.
Diversity without tolerance produces polarization.
Ah, thank you. Good enough.
Cooperation, just like you're doing right now. What are you doing? You've got multiple clubs, and I love the acronym CATS, by the way, one of my favorite plays. And Crystal Palace is the name of the semi-secret area out in the Rocky Mountains back when I had a NASA security clearance, where it's ground control for nuclear war will be in Crystal Palace. So I love the name. So what are you doing? You are doing something in a cooperative fashion, and that reduces polarization. Instead, you could have says, hey, Sutton and Cheam's just, you know, the bomb. They are better than CATS and Crystal Palace and the other codes, and we're not letting them in. We're going to have this stupid guy from the States by ourselves. Have clubs that do that kind of thing. No, you can't come in. We're special. So when you cooperate, you tend to reduce that polarization, and you tend to, when you cooperate, increase your tolerance of other people. Competition, gee, do we have that in contesting? Oh, you bet. There are people that don't want to make their log public because it might show one of their competitors where they go at what time, what are they listening to, and things like that. The competition among groups reduces cooperation. You don't cooperate to compete. Now, we're somewhat at that point now. It's not just about contesting per se. I don't know what the last time RSGB and United Kingdom went through some band plan assessments. You may be dealing with that on some digital modes and things like that. We are here in the States. That's a scarce resource. One of the scarcest resources we have are what frequency allocations we have. And so the specialists are going to fight and compete over who gets access, who gets their share. And right now, you've got the Morse code operators in the States up in arms because they're losing, they think, some of their frequencies to digital. and so on and so on. And what about those AMers? After all, we're real hams. We were here before you sidebanders, and we don't, we need to have our frequencies there too. So that kind of shucking and jiving, if you will, in terms of competition, prevents tolerance, it reduces cooperation, and it increases polarization. Now, these little social science terms about groups and how they relate to individuals, that's not a binary thing. Think a potentiometer, not an on and off switch, but that's some of the social circuits, if you will, that shape our hobby. Next slide. Well, all of these can be seen in the ubiquitous questions. Who are real hams? One of my friends from Atlanta, where I was licensed, I lived over there for a few years and worked down at the Capitol in Atlanta. Dick Bentley, he has a column, or did, I think they've done away with it, called Strays on EHAM. And it's just sort of these little odd comments. And Dick sent me a note and says, Frank, send me something. I just don't have any, nobody's sending me anything. So I thought, okay, real hams are ... anyone with a valid license. No brainer, right? I mean, vanilla ice cream, no cherries on top. How do you get upset at that? Bread with no jam. I got hate mail. I literally got hate mail and threatened me personally to shoot me with a bolt from a crossbow. There was a guy who trains, he's a falconer. He trains falcons in North Carolina. And if you ever saw me, he was going to shoot me with his crossbow. Don't think that's a live wire. That's like one of the old All-American 5 radios where AC is live on the chassis if you got it plugged in the wall the wrong way. You don't think these things operate and are real? Who are real hams? By the way, what's the answer that most people give? Real hams use CW. That's what the belief is. Okay. Now, is that activity on network radio, is that real ham radio? Well, some people don't think so. Some people don't think Link Computers is real ham radio. Is that the technology? No. It's what we think of the technology and what we think of ourselves. And so that's the epitome of all those things that I talked about in the previous slide come out about these strongly held beliefs. And if you can only use RF in transmission without any assistance, as in cell phones, and so if you believe that, that's not real radio. Well, if you had a Martian who landed here and they looked at this and they would think, well, how did hams get to do whatever it is? They got to do that because hams did that. Therefore, isn't real ham radio what some large number of hams actually do, almost by definition? Now, that's not what many of us believe, but that's kind of a philosopher who studies logic would say that. What's ham radio? Whatever a lot of licensed hams do. So we don't have a lot of tolerance for that collectively. And I'm not preaching about that or not. I'm just saying this is how you find out the dipole's resonance. You look at these elements of group. So our collective lack of tolerance, in my view as a sociologist, is one of our main roadblocks in this activity called amateur radio. It's analogous to the heart disease of hardening of the arteries where plaque builds up. It's what I call hardening of the categories. I'm a CW guy, and Richard's going to agree with me because I do CW. You know, I saw you hold your hand up earlier, Richard, so I'm going to assume you're going to agree with me. See, if we have those beliefs, we put ourselves in these categories, and we put ourselves in these categories, then we divide our collective power into a whole lot of different tribes. You know, I will say this, old chap, old buddy, old pal, if all the Native American tribes had banded together, y'all might have turned around those ships and headed back home to Maryville, England, because the problem was they weren't together either. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. Just trying to make a few points here. Hardening of the categories results from this club. Now, one of those forces within and without that affect amateur radio. Let's focus on ourselves for a moment. the best data in the U.S., and I conducted that study, and I hadn't found anything any larger, so I'm going to just say it's the best, even though it may be bad at heart. No more than about 50% of ARL members are currently members of a club. Why is that? Well, we asked them, and all the things they said really amounted to poor leadership. Why do we have poor leadership in ham clubs? Do we have any training for leadership? Do clubs talk about that with members? Here's the real question. Let's see, I've got a note here. Let's see, Martin, M1MRB, Frank, pause after this next one until I get 12 volunteers. Okay, are you willing to serve in an official club leadership position? Now, Martin wants me just to wait until he gets, I think, 20. Would you take 10, Martin? Well, why is that? Well, there's what we typically call an 80-20 rule. 20% folks will get engaged, 80% won't. Whose club is it? Oh, it's the leadership's club, and I'm just coming in to enjoy the ice cream and the cherry on top. And we tend to have that view about clubs. The problem with that is that we tend to have burnout if the 80% remain takers. Now, so what about clubs? Clubs are that key component on our circuit board that give life to us. From other surveys I've done, people who are hams who are members of clubs have tried newer technology quicker than those who aren't. They know more about new technology than those who aren't members of clubs. And it's something that we learn a lot about. So if we didn't have clubs, we might not have the activity that we have today, and yet we often complain we have repeaters and we don't hear people on. Now, Martin, M1MRB, has talked about this at RSGB in his talk, Grow, Decline, or Disappear. And he and Chris held a very good forum at RSGB. I think, was it 2 years ago?
It was last year, Frank.
Okay, last year. My, how time flies. It's an excellent, excellent video, and it's on the podcast. And there was a member of that group, and forgive me, because I've actually communicated with him directly, but I forget his name. He had the concept of clubs or hubs. Tonight, you're acting in a hub. Now, you have a leader club in Sutton and Cheam, but you're leveraging the fact that there's a speaker who's going to aggravate you for a little while with some ideas, and you're putting that together. And so the gentleman who talked in that same group, it's on that same video, about clubs or hubs, very innovative idea, because how can we then leverage those activities to have a good club environment that engages members to continue to learn? I don't know about on your side of the pond. People don't like to come to a club meeting and hear the secretary's minutes and argue about where the comma should be, or the fact that they really don't have much money in the bank and that be it. If they don't learn something or get engaged, whether it's informal discussion over a meal or a chat or things like that. I'm vice president for our programming and for my local club, and we're like you. We're having to do things, on electronically. We can't meet. The building that we meet in is actually closed because of the shutdown. So, what do you do to get people to engage? I started a thing called a 3-minute update, and I would get the treasurer to randomly pick 3 people from the sign-in sheet, and they would stand up and take 1 minute to say, what have they done since the last month? Martin does this on the ICQ podcast each fortnight with the presenters. Hey, what have you been up to? And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten an email from somebody look me up on QRZ or the ICQ podcast saying, hey, you mentioned X, and could you send me more information? Or I used to do X, and I'm wondering what the latest is, or I did this and just wanted to share it with you. Wonderful. That little activity has proven to be very good. So what do you do to leverage activities? And the way we organize is important. Now, one of Martin's concepts, and if I got this correct, Martin, some clubs might need to disappear. Why is it? My view is because they've gone into extreme ritualism. They meet just to meet. Everybody's bored. New people don't come in. Why? Because they're boring, and they're doing it because they've always done it. Now, you'll get some people who, I'm 67, so in my age bracket and beyond, they're doing it. It's purely a social activity, and they just happen to be hams, no programs, etc. So that's another example of ritualism. So clubs can emerge, and I'm a big believer in that, hey, if nobody wants to serve in the leadership mode, and that's an ongoing process, let's don't have the club anymore, because that ritualism doesn't help new people because they think the hobby's dead. Next slide. Wow, that looks like a fish that, yeah, go back one. That looks like a fish somebody ate, and these are the bones. Well, what this is what in my discipline we call a life course, and it gets more sophisticated. But think for a moment about what tends to happen, and there are variations. I mean, people aren't the same. What tends to happen at these 5-year age intervals? What are people engaged in their life? Take ham radio out of it. We complain about not getting new members into the hobby. Well, look at that 10 to 15 to 25. Up in Starkville, where MFJ is located, my former club, the Magnolia Club, I had served as president of that when there were 4 members, and I was able to get it back up to about 25 after a couple of years. They are just going great, much better than I ever did while I was there. And they had a 12-year-old that went from technician to extra. 12 years. Wow. And he's getting a lot of support. But that's unusual. So you think about getting young people in. What are young people doing today that when you hear the old timers say, oh, I had an uncle who taught me ham radio, or my father was in ham radio, or whatever. What's different about that age period today than it was 50 years ago? There is so much engagement of young people in many activities. Better transportation to get them there. If any of you listening have young children or teenage children who don't drive, you know what your job is. It is chauffeur. All the activities that are situated around schools really cut down the availability of time. So we can go through that. When on that chart do you have people who are at their peak earning period, who tend to have an empty nest at home, and they're getting ready to retire, and they got some more free time on their hands because they may have moved up in the world that they practice their profession in, so they get a little more flex. When is that? Well, that's somewhere around 50 to 60. And guess what? The late in life hams, I'm one of them. I got interested in ham radio at 8 years old, looking at that little green eye on my grandmother's thing. But I only got licensed at 58. I was around broadcasting, built 2 radio stations. I read QST magazine. I just never took the time to get licensed. So when you think about that, those are some of the fastest growing hams in the States. They're growing about 4% a year for late in life hams. So I just want to make a point here with this little diagram. That's not good or bad individuals. It's not good or bad hobby. It's got things that have nothing to do with the hobby, but life and culture has changed. Now, when in the life course somebody becomes a ham, changes their outlook on the hobby, we've all seen people that says, I was a ham since I was 12 years old, and I know more than you, and if you'll shut up, I'll tell you all about it. Now, they may do it in a much nicer way, but length of time in the hobby, particularly if you were there early, tenure tends to be part of our culture and seen be associated with knowledge. And yet we also know some of us old timers that if they change the frequency on their radio, they may not get it back because they've kind of forgotten a lot of those things. So in reality, that's not always true. But one of our big things here is aging. You know, we tend to see the graying of amateur radio. I will tell you, I've got a 2-part article in the National Contesting Journal in the fall and winter 2020 issues. They'll own the copyright, but Martin, I'll make sure I get a copy to you. I can certainly share my preprint to you if that's of interest. And I think you'll see some data, at least from the United States, hams, members of ARL, and that sort of thing. Talk a little bit about there. Now, amateur radio, I want to make this as a point, and we'll go next slide. Amateur radio is a leisure time activity. We study ham use. We study time use here in this country, and we have a time use study that's magnificent, one of the best survey series that we have. In the United States, those who are 15 years and older spend an average of 5 hours a week in leisure and sports. 60% of that time is watching television. I make the point in this NCJ article, our biggest enemy is television. And that includes us. I find myself wanting to watch a program with my wife. I've got a net that's going to kick off at 8 p.m. And my wife has learned to tolerate that. My phone will pop up. I go, put that on pause. I'll be back. You know. So keep in mind, there are things outside the hobby that have changed the context that we're in. Next slide. Okay, Dr. Kamal Singh made a presentation, which I think is magnificent. He challenged us to reclaim our relevancy to the world. His argument is that the latest industrial revolution, analog to digital, really left amateur radio behind. I highly recommend that you look at his talk on YouTube. I agree with Richard to everyone. I'm going to get there in just a moment. You just quick on the draw, sir. I highly recommend it. Let's go to the next slide. I want to compliment what I call the Singh prophecy. Relevant to whom? You know, he makes a little bit of a universal, and I don't think he means it this way, but he just taking what he said. You know, relevant. We're not relevant. We're relevant to whom? You know, we're breathing and eating is relevant to everyone. Now let's then go down. Who's ham radio got to be relevant to? We have to be relevant to Ofcom, to FCC, or we don't get any frequencies. So we got to be relevant there. We have to be relevant to a strategic market, and we could go on and talk about that. So relevancy is strategic, not universal. Number two, should amateur radio, as he said, be seen as a portal to only engineering education? We've got a lot of famous people who are hams. There's a famous person, very famous person in the United Kingdom who's not a ham but a fan of amateur radio, and you can pick Martin's brain over a pint for that one. We celebrate that all the time, and very few of those are engineers. So I think we're stronger if the hobby attracts people from all sectors, not just engineering. Nothing against engineering, but the reality is amateur radio simply could not stop that electronics revolution that Kamal says left us behind. We helped make it, not for ham radio, but for us. Bob Whitty here in the States, W-I-T-T-E, worked for Hewlett-Packard, designed some of the wonderful Hewlett-Packard gear, and off camera to my left, I've got one of the devices that he designed, and his article in the HP Journal describes the thinking behind it, and I've gotten to know him a bit. He was a ham. So many hams helped make that revolution, but it's not our fault that it has exploded. But we can find our lane, as Dr. Singh says, and we can make contributions. For example, Dr. Jack Prodom here in the States, along with Asher Forhan in India, collaborating with the University of Florida to make an open source ventilator for the COVID pandemic. And there are others. One of the key elements about futuring that's important to the method is, okay, you fear that X is going to happen. That is, all of our hams are dying and we're going to just stop growing. All right, let's say that happens. Now what does the world look like? Well, what would it be like if we stopped growing and the numbers significantly declined? You know, we're at an all-time high here in the States, 750,000 plus hams. Well, what was it like earlier in history? We grew. we were always given frequencies that had little to no commercial value. We always had a dog's breakfast to play with, 200 meters and down. So we cry a lot about we're going to lose our privileges and our frequencies. We might. I hope we don't. But if we do, didn't we survive that before? Next slide. Now, in framing this with you, and I'll try to wind up here pretty quickly, understanding the hobby is our hook to determining which of those plural futures we want. Now, we often have what I call personal windshields. You know, like we drive our car, you know, and we see things through our windshield. We typically understand amateur radio by what we see. Well, I've never seen anybody do that. Oh, and everybody I know does that. Well, who's right? Well, they have no way of knowing. That gives us siloed thinking, and what does that give us? Polarization. We don't even know what the average age of our licensed hams are. We need much better scientific data about amateur radio and licensed hams, and then groups like clubs. And this also includes the commercial amateur radio sector. People right now are mad with flex radio systems. Why? They're not getting their 6,000 series radio shipped to them in time. Are they sorry out there in Austin, Texas? They got part of a $1 billion contract with the U.S. Air Force with Raytheon to help use their technology to do the next gen radio communications in HF for the military. Is that good or bad? Wait a minute. Dr. Singh said make ourselves relevant. The military thought one of our companies is pretty doggone relevant. So we need to understand that commercial sector in addition. Well, how do we get there? I've been pushing in here in the U.S. to the ARL for a research working committee, research working group. I'm told at the June board meeting that will be up. It's already been vetted. I'm told that'll be approved, and I'm told by my division director I'll be the statistical consultant. I'll believe that when I see it. That's just my take on the ARL. I would encourage you to push the RSGB to have a research working committee. Don't take no for an answer. The president, and I forget his name, I think John's his first name, I heard him on a podcast recently, says, you know, they've been doing some of these opt-in surveys every couple of years, but he says they don't have anybody that really understands how to analyze them. There are many statisticians, there are many people in the United Kingdom. I'm friends with a bunch of statisticians in the United Kingdom, and they're some of the best in the world at their specialties. Some of them could be hams. I don't know. But I'll even volunteer to help across the pond. I'm an RSGB member. But if we don't collect data, we won't know. Do we know where the licensure database is? I've taken the FCC database and geocoded them, put them on maps from 2000 to present day. There are some issues. Yeah, and so it looks like there's a new president from the one who said that. Thanks. Now, there's some issues in the United Kingdom about your addresses and things. My point is, if you don't push to collect new data, the RSGB will probably be status quo, just like the ARL. But finally, the recruitment of others into amateur radio is going to require us to do something that we haven't been willing to do in the past. And that's for us to change what we old-timers think, say, and do to our young people. Are you willing to do that? Next slide.
Alert audio now unmuted.
One future for amateur radio, I think, is very, very bright. We're in a renaissance period for experimenting and building. And hey, that's how we all got started, right? Building radios and cheap electronics, the maker movement. Richard was early on. A lot of the makers are gamers. I just bought a Dell Precision 7910. It's about 4 years old. A lot of the gamers, I paid $900 US for it. Got 2 processors, 16 cores. It's got an 8 gig video card. It's got 128 gigs RAM. Wah, 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 wah. You know, it'll probably lift my roof. Certainly ought to make coffee, right? So makers are in that zone of doing what we hams did. And I think Dr. Singh was capturing that sentiment. It's a natural chemistry for sparking interest by young people in ham radio. Some of them are using RF they're using over in the States the unlicensed Part 15 to do a lot of cool things, particularly with robotics. Well, we need to think about reaching them where they are rather than expecting them to come to us. A sociologist named Ray Oldham coined the term third places. Family or home is the first place, work is the second place, and all those third places, pubs, churches, other groups that you meet people writ large in, where are young people's third places? And schools are great. I spent most of my life in schools, but schools are complicated today. It's very hard, but yet what we typically do, we solve that by we get a club and a school. All right, I'm looking at the blokes here, looking back at me and looking at your age. And what a wonderful group. Now you show up at the schoolmaster's office. Hey, we want you to turn your little kids over to us in the afternoons. And we're going to show them some stuff. How's that going to turn out? If that person says, yeah, I hear you, Carl. I appreciate that comment. And I'm not saying schools don't work, but it's like the screwdriver antenna. When you put 100 watts in, what do you get out of the area? You can put some effort into schools and you will get some things out, but it's not the only third place. Here in the United States, the Gallup Survey Organization reported last year, the one place that is the common cultural crossroads in the United States, I don't know what it is in Great Britain, is libraries, public libraries. You have more women there and you have more young people there. Now, wait a minute, isn't the ARL say that's who we're trying to recruit? Find them where they are. How often you may have something at the rally for amateur radio, but how often do you have a ham radio booth that you probably have to pay for, and probably more than we pay at amateur rallies? Get a booth for presentation at a gamer or maker conference. Get there. Don't stay here. That may work for dogs and other pets, but it doesn't work for potential young hams because they don't have to. That dog may want to get fed tonight, so that dog will probably do tricks for you. Next slide.
Did it come through?
No.
Oh, it shows at my end.
Okay, I haven't seen it yet on mine.
I might need to reshare 1 second. Let me do that.
Okay.
Again. I'll reshare it. Give me a second, Frank.
Great, thanks. This will just about wind it up, guys. Okay, good. The speaker needs to see it because he doesn't know what's on it.
There you go. Hopefully it's come through. Hopefully you got it there, Frank.
Here's the punchline. We need to facilitate youth-driven clubs in tandem with our adult-driven ones. Now, trust me, I've been around kids for 45 years. I've been teaching young people. They don't want to sit at our knee. Now, I got a granddaughter. She will tolerate me wanting to corral her in my easy chair and listen to life as it were. They do that because they love you and they're your kid. But the random young person, most of them really doesn't want to just sit at your knee and listen to how you did it with something called Litz wire, galena crystals, and a wire. If you don't believe it, the ICQ podcast episode 319 has an interview with a 15-year-old in Illinois here in the U.S. who started the Illinois Young Ham Club. And he's kind of caught fire with it. And he's a real nice kid. He's a very nice guy. He didn't want to be offensive, but he told me on the interview and then off mic, yeah, I mean, young people just don't want to hang with you guys. I mean, yeah, we'll do it some, but we kind of want to be shown, give us the pieces, let us get engaged. He didn't say this, but I do. And then get the hell out of their way until they ask for something. When we get them engaged, they will get active. Now, I'm going to roll the script back to the age of Radio Caroline. And what was the spirit that gave rise to Radio Caroline? Wouldn't we have wanted to be given an opportunity and then get the heck out of our way? Wouldn't we wanted to have been engaged? And that's part of what I'm saying. Let's soften our categories when it comes to recruiting young people. Next slide. Now that future that I just described is partly yours to make. It's not fundamentally different than building a repeater site. I'm on top of a hospital here in Jackson, Mississippi, and putting up a fusion repeater with Thomas Gandy, who is an engineer with AT&T. What we have to do is try to learn more and pay attention to the appropriate social circuits shaping the organization behavior of amateur radio. Next slide. So thanks for listening. Here's my contact information. You can look at the ICQ podcast. You know, I've mentioned ICQ podcast a lot. Martin, be sure to tell Colin I really gave the pitch here as a company guy. So I'll be happy to entertain questions. I ran a little bit longer than I had timed it, 56 minutes. I wanted to shoot for 40, so I apologize. But I'll be happy to take questions.
Frank, thank you very much. Let me just, has anybody got any, there's a few questions, there are a few things in the chat window there, but if anyone's got any questions, you should now be able to unmute yourself. So please feel free to fire away.
Just quickly, Frank, Colin will probably pay you the usual rate. Hi.
Good. I'm looking forward. I'm building my Christmas fund. You know, a sock with coal in it.
Yeah. And listen, I'm going to have to duck out of the question stage because I've got to go, Frank. But being here all the time, even though I've moved to my video a couple of times, very good talk. Thank you very much for doing it for us. I'm going to let
you. And Martin, I want to tell you, 73 is one to you and Carol.
Yeah. Well, she'll be up in a minute sitting in the aircraft room wanting to know why I haven't got my head down because I'm up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. So
yeah. Take care.
Listen, thanks, Frank, and I'll leave you in Chris's capable hands. And guys, great to have you all on. I think we counted 26, wasn't it, Chris?
Yeah, 26. I think about that. A couple of duplicates, so probably about 24, something like that. Yeah, but yeah, quite a few.
Yeah, and for a first kick-off, I think that's good. And thanks to all the people from the other clubs who joined us. You know, let's share this. It's a hobby. Well, we don't have to fight each other. It's a hobby. Let's share the knowledge. And with that, I'm going to say 73 to you all. And we'll catch you again soon. Frank, I'll try and catch up with you at some point in time over the weekend, yeah?
Sounds good.
Yeah. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Martin. So has anybody else got any questions? Obviously, there's a lot of material that Frank covered there. A lot of it was thought-provoking. Richard, I see you come off mute. Do you want to speak on anything?
Yeah, just a couple of points to make, really. One of the things he said earlier, very early on, diversity without tolerance equals polarization. I think that really does describe the attitude of, I'm going to put it, the club management in a number of clubs where they are looking back to what they were in the 50s and 60s rather than what they are now. And another point really, I think, I've always banged on about and had great big public arguments at RSGB AGMs with the, well, not so much the president, but the general manager, a particular general manager, is here in the UK, the presentation, the publicity, public PR of the hobby, it's almost non-existent. Now, my background's Polish, and if you go to Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, Czech, you know, that way sort of eastwards, amateur radio is known about everywhere. Schools, right, in Poland it's got a very big link with schools and scouts, but that goes back historically to the 1920s and the War of Independence and things like that. But you go to Eastern Europe and sort of top end of Scandinavia, Nordic Europe, amateur radio is, it's normal. It's something you can mention and talk about, and it's known about in schools and clubs and things like this. It's sort of once you get west of Germany that it seems to, especially here in the UK, it's almost zero. It's hidden. It's something you hear the comment of, oh, I didn't realise that was still going.
Right.
You know, and I'll leave it to anyone else to throw a threepence in over that.
Richard, let me just echo what you said, and that I want to try to code this, and you'll figure out why I'm doing it. Let me just say this: you can do the math and figure out who the most famous ham operator in the state of Mississippi is. Okay, easily. He was told by a club in our capital that he wasn't welcome because he was a no-code tech. So that lack of tolerance. Now, gee, they would love to have this person in their club, and he's given a talk to them, but I don't think they'll ever see a dime of his dues and official membership. And it's a shame when those actions by some back in the day linger on. So we could probably all parse that, Richard. But thank you for the comment. I appreciate it very much.
Well, I remember as a young 17-year-old, when I first got my amateur radio license here in the UK, I went to a local club. In those days, we had Class A and Class B licenses. And Class A was a real license holder who had done technical exam and a Morse code test. And the Class B license holder had just done the technical exam, no Morse code test. I was a Class B, and I went to a local club, which was in walking distance of my mother's home, knocked on the door, introduced myself at a club evening, and was basically told in a polite way, to great laughter, to sling my hook, come back when I'd got a real amateur radio license. In other words, a Class A. Now, at the time, I was working as an engineer on a radio station at Leafield. I had actually, by accident, employers had taught us Morse to 22 words a minute, special maritime standard, because we were being trained as electronics officers on ships. It's only when they realized they'd given us a wrong course they stopped. But I never ever took a test as an amateur and never really got to grips with it. I stuck with teleprinter because that's what I work, and I like data. That's it. Never forgotten the attitude of that club. And when I heard a few years ago that it had completely and utterly folded into the dirt, I sort of thought, shame that it actually took so long, 40, 50 years. That attitude, I think, is the wrong one to have. More welcoming, not, you're not one of us.
Well, you see my phrase, hardening of the categories. And when they fossilize, that lack of tolerance and the polarization. And that's why we're not stronger, at least in the States, because we tend to be polarized. Anyway, that's my thought. Thanks for the comment. Other questions or comments?
No, I can understand that, as I hold an extra up in Indiana. And my club meets there, originally when things changed, it was, are you a 20 words a minute man? And you'll understand that.
I understand that. Yeah, I certainly do.
Thanks, Richard. Has anybody else got any questions or want to make any comments or disagree with what Frank said, even?
Feel free to.
I'll say my thing.
Go on then, Joe.
Hey, Joe.
Okay, so I'm 22. I've been doing this since I was, 12, 13. And it's funny that you mentioned about the TV, and I think it was Richard that said about gaming, because part of the reason I got into this was partly because my dad said it was a good idea, which I'm sure is how a lot of people got into things like this. But also for me, now I'm older, and I'm not just doing it because my dad does it. For me, it was always a thing apart from the internet, and it was like almost like an escape from it, because our lives are so built around that now. Especially now I work in it as well. So you spend 8 hours a day on the computer at work, and then you spend another 4 hours at home after work, and it gets a bit much. And then since this COVID thing's been happening, and I've been stuck in my flat, I've just sometimes I've got a receiver. I can't do any transmitting from here because I can't put an antenna up, but I've got a receiver, and I've just been listening to that. And like I say, it's I think for people my age that I've spoken to, I've convinced a few people to get into it, because people my age, when you really get through to them, they are looking for that kind of escape from the so-called sort of technological aspect, because there's a lot of it, and sometimes you just main ways, again, I realize this isn't everyone, and I don't want to do the whole categorization thing, but for me, the most exciting thing about ham radio is sort of going off into the field and setting up an antenna and a tent. Because
Portable operations, yeah.
Yeah, because for me that was an escape from just being on the computer all the time. And I
Joe,
think
you
that
make
is
some great
how
great comments, and here's what I think is the good thing and the sad thing. The good thing is what you just told us. Your biography. If you ever listen to Eric Guth on QSO Today, he's got these structured biographies, and you learn a lot about the history of hams. The sad part of what you're telling us is we have no earthly idea how many people like you there are because we don't collect good data. And I get a little frustrated perhaps with ARL and getting them to think about if you put, oh yeah, we got a youth program, we're kind of going to put them over to the side. My strategy, Joe, and I would encourage you and others who want to speak out, if ARL wants to recruit young people, why don't they put one on the board? I promise you, that will get more done. So I appreciate your comments, and having been very, very involved in computing technology, I was able to build 3 computer networks available in 60 countries in 1983 on ASCII terminals, the proof of concept. And it's such a blend, isn't it? With that world and what you can do in amateur radio, there is such a
definitely, yeah.
Yes, it's very simpatico, very simpatico. I see Stuart there. It looks like he has got Braveheart coming at me. I'm looking at his background. It looks like Mel Gibson and Braveheart.
I think Stuart might have stepped away actually, but
Okay.
Is anybody else?
Stuart Barber.
Thank you, Joe, for the comments there. Does anybody else want to? Well, we got Frank on. Anybody else want to chip in?
David, I've been watching you. I think you got something to say. David Milling?
Maybe.
It looks like he's muted himself.
I'm not sure we can hear David actually.
Need to
Oh, there we
unmute.
go.
No, he's still muted. I think it's because he's on his iPad and his desktop at the same time.
Okay.
I might be able to do it remotely if that's what he wants me to do. Possibly not. Okay.
I see John Rogers, and John, I want you to know, I'm usually like this, and I say that's your lighting scheme, and I'm like Joe. I worked around screens and computers so much, I wanted the lights down because it's easier on your eyes. Tell us something. What are your thoughts?
Right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Well, I've recently joined QCWA. It's called the Century Wireless Association, which is an American club.
Right.
We have the UK equivalent of the Radio Amateurs Old Timers Association. And when you're trying to find people who, I'm 57, I've been involved with amateur radio since I was 5. I'm a 3rd gen radio ham.
Yeah.
But
you got a tremendous culture in your family for amateur radio, 3rd generation.
Thank you. Clubs like Radio Amateur Old Timers, they were basically dealing with when I was in the war, this is what we did, etc., etc. At this time, okay, it's 2020 with 75th anniversary of VE Day, but you don't want that pumped to you every single year. QCWA does a very neat thing. It actually gives grants to people who are at college, not necessarily engineering, who are radio amateurs. We don't do this sort of thing over here. Occasionally you get the 1 engineer per year. There's a big engineering competition, and it's only about £1,000, but there's no commitment for it either. The RSGB have a youth team. We don't hear much of them at all. I'm not a member of the RSGB, except when I want something, which is usually cheap books. I'm a member of the ARL. I'm a member of the WIA. I'm also the chairman of the Cats Club, but that's another story. So, Frank said about getting a youth member or a young person on the board of the RSGB. I noticed there's some very new call signs. I'm hoping they're going to start kicking in and say, we need to bring other people in. I don't know. Well,
you have some great points, and you come from a a background, if you will, that certainly in the States there are, I don't know how many third generation, but there's many second generation. And so you come at it with a slice of that culture that's very important. Let me make a couple of things. I don't want anybody to think that my comments were throwing stones. You know, as a sociologist, just like a brain surgeon, if you're a brain surgeon, you're going to deal with guts and gooey things, and you don't turn your stomach over. So, you know, as a sociologist, you look at these things. It may sound like you're preaching or whatever. You're simply trying to be analytical. So just I want to make sure that people take my observations as certainly attempted objectivity in terms of observation. But David, I want to make a point. There's a famous book in the U.S. called "Who Moved My Cheese?" And it was one of these little management books, and you know, and it went back to Frederick Taylor era management principles. But here's the point of it: the clubs you're in, whether it's Cats, Crystal Palace, and I forget there was another one perhaps, and then Sutton and Cheam's, you can move the cheese of the RSGB just like clubs in the States have done with ARL to some degree. How do you do that? You give an award. There is a Young Ham of the Year award that was cobbled together by some hams. They got CQ magazine involved eventually because CQ would look good. I mean, you know, that's the way it is. They give a ham. They give an award. It's given out at a regional rally or ham fest here in Huntsville, Alabama, and I'm usually there. And that's been a great springboard. It really gets a lot of fanfare to those young people. And so people like Joe, when he was younger, here you've got somebody who may be a couple of years older than you. You say, wow, they've been embraced. They've been helped. One of them, Marty Sulloway, has been invited by K3LR of DX Engineering to go on some of these DX expeditions and things. So, Dave, one thing you could do as a club, hey, maybe the group of clubs meeting now, you come together and decide we're going to give a UK Young Ham of the Year award. You see what you can do, you do it. I promise you the RSGB will take note. You help move their cheese by doing it yourself. That's just a thought. And we've got a model over here in the States. If you wanted to just Google Young Ham of the Year, one of the guys on Ham Nation, Don Wilbanks, is one of the movers and shakers there. And so you already got a template. You can take it and modify it. But do it. You're at that part of the circuit design where, you know, your inductance or capacitance or resistance, as the case may be, can make a difference in the performance of that overall circuit. So more power to you in doing that.
Thanks a lot.
John, I picked on you a minute ago with about the dark light. That's how I like to be. Did you have something to say?
Well, now I've got to get the thing to work. This is the first time I've been on Zoom, so it's all rather new for me. I'd say to you, Frank, that I only came into amateur radio some 3 years ago, so it's all very new to me. It has been a source of concern to me, though, the general lack of interest to the subject. Now, I totally agree with everything you've been saying here this evening. It's very, very interesting in the way that you put it across. It is a bit of a worry that it would appear that there are not many young people interested in amateur radio these days. But it's an interesting point that you make that, of course, if we don't have accurate statistics on the kind of age groups of people joining the amateur radio fraternity, then we really don't know what level of new people are coming in and how long the amateur radio is likely to last for. I sincerely wouldn't like to see it come to an end. You mentioned about clubs and the kind of clickiness in some clubs, and Richard made the comment about the difficulties with clubs. I've been a member of different clubs, nothing to do with radio, for various types of clubs. I won't go over the details of that. And it can be very, very clicky, and you then suddenly realise that the thinking I have is, how can you call yourself a club if you're not friendly and inviting. I turned up 3 years ago to do my training for foundation, and it was a Saturday morning. I turned up to the Sutton and Cheam Club, and Neil and Martin were there setting up. And I had no idea if I was in the right place. I walked down to the back of the Scout Hall and such like where it was. And I walked in, there's these two guys there, and I just said, you know what, am I in the right place? They were so warm and friendly. And that set the scene. I mean, I think the Sutton and Cheam Club is one of the best clubs that I've ever been a member of. They're so friendly, they are so helpful. I just before Christmas finally did my advanced exam. That's in about 3 years. I only joined to do the foundation exam, and because of the encouragement and help that I've had from the guys in the Sutton and Cheam Club, I find myself now with an advanced qualification. It was never my plan to do so, but I just feel that it would be nice if there were more clubs out there like that. It doesn't take much effort. We've got friendly guys from the top. That's Martin down. And like everything else in life, you know, things work best if you've got people at the top who know the ideas and work at things in the right way. And Sutton and Cheam have got the right way of doing things. It would be really, really interesting, Frank, to see what the statistics. I'd certainly, for one, be very interested to find out what the statistics are worldwide and in Europe and various countries as to the age group, the average age group, as you said, and what kind of level of youngsters we're getting joining the amateur radio.
I'm going to disappoint you, and it's unfortunate, but you know, I kind of made this. We don't have a clue about an accurate average age, median age distribution. I was able to get the ARL to share with me their membership data. Most will volunteer their birthday because you get an incentive like a free book or something. You know, fork over your birthday, you get a free book. You know, I'm hearing some laughter. You know what I mean. And I spend my $10 off every year in December. So that's not perfect. And keep in mind, there's about 150,000 members of the ARL out of the 750,000 license holders. And this is what I'm saying, John, the sad reality is we simply don't have the data. Now, in talking with Chris a little bit, I know Ofcom releases a list to the RSGB. I gave a talk to the Dale and Denby Club and Nick Bradley. I made this offer, and I'll make it to you. I said, look, Nick, if you can figure out getting the call book data, and Chris has told me that many people tick the box to say, I don't want to share my address. I don't know if that includes no postal code or what have you. One of the things I taught for years, I've been doing geographic information systems since the early 80s. And so I was so old doing that when they developed professional GIS status, they said I didn't need to take the test because I taught most everybody on the examining committee. So I said, look, if we get that, I'll geocode them as you know, as best I can down to street address or postcode or what have you. Put where your club is located, and we'll look at where if you'll share with me the call signs of your club membership roster, just the call signs. I'll put them on maps. We do this. I've done this as a consultant. I've taught people in schools of business how to do the draw area for your market. Hospitals do it all the time, see where their patients come from, what's the catchment area. And it would be good for clubs. I've done that in the U.S. for a number of clubs. Well, I know from that there are people who drive up to 30 miles in the U.S. to attend the club meeting, passing by several other clubs. Why? I think John hit it on the head. Some are friendly, some are not. And so about 30 miles is that polygon around. So if we can even start with the license database and get a handle on my specialty, you know, I said physicist who studies quasars, who studies gamma ray burst. I'm a sociologist, and my PhD is also in statistics, minor in computer science, Joe. So slung a few packets in my day, did some coding, figured out I could get the money to hire people who do head sound coding every day. It's a lot more efficient. So in that world, we can do that, take that approach and figure out the social ecology, what we call spatial demography, putting people on maps of what's the ecology, where are you drawing from? And then you can see, here's my draw area. Here's 70 people who are licensed who may want to be in our club. Maybe we can contact them. Maybe we can recruit them. Maybe we can do that. So I'll make that offer to the clubs here. Not everybody would want to release their membership roster. I have no business interest in it. I'm just doing it to promote.
Might violate the GDPR.
Well, and the GDPR, I hear that a lot. Colin is love Colin. He's a GPDR Nazi. He wouldn't even share an email someone sent in saying nice things about that. Can't do it, GDPR. Okay, Colin. So, all right. So, point being is, yes, we want to be legal. Yes, we want to be ethical, and we do want to do that. But Ofcom does give. I'm a member of RSGB. Nick ordered it. Well, I ordered it too. You know, they put it on USB stick. So we'll see where that goes. I've done that here in the States. We have a different situation. It's all public data, and I've geocoded them from 2000 every January slice on up to the present year. Starting there, I'm long-winded, and I apologize, John, but I'm coming back to your question. What I pushed ARL to do is a every other year survey of a high-quality statistical sample, top-down, population down to the sample. Let's get that survey in, and let's ask them what year they were born. Then ask them about things indicating activity. You know, if it, well, you know, there's only 20% of hams who got licenses that are active. We don't know that. And we also don't have common agreement on what being active means. You said you were just going to do a foundation license. Well, that one club said, if you're not a 20 person, you know, you're not one of us. You know, let's deal with the license database, which is our superset of hams. Real hams at least include those with a valid license. Then you can argue about all the other characteristics. But if we don't start that program, we should. And I will tell you, now, John, you've been in other clubs. For technology-focused clubs, the pilots groups do a lot more than we do. They're kind of technological. They got all those instruments, and they get instrument ratings, and they're regulated by government too to be a pilot. And you look at other clubs, other big organizations, and they blow us out of the water, and yet we brag to the world how technologically focused we are. And, you know, we ought to get in the game a little better so we can give better service to our hobby if we want it to continue to grow. Because, John, we simply don't know the answer. We've got some opt-in surveys that may be spot on, but you don't know statistically how they generalize. They have what we call internal validity, but they don't have that external validity. I've done some of them here in the Delta Division. But I embrace your enthusiasm, John. I can see it in your eyes after looking at it classes of students for 45 years. I can almost see, if you will, the smoke of an idea coming out, you know, and I appreciate your enthusiasm. And for another late in life ham, I've been licensed about 10 years. I appreciate the enthusiasm you have, because that, when you go to a club meeting and you have at least one person who has the enthusiasm for the hobby that you have, it's infectious. It may be more infectious than coronavirus, who knows, but it just takes a few to spark. You know, we talk about, you know, an inductor, you know, moving a magnet through a coil that generates a current. Well, that's a social circuit for someone just like you. You generate that activity. So,
thank you, Frank. I appreciate that.
Thanks, John, and we'll pay for the kind words later. Thank you. Has anybody else, I see a few people have come off mute, has anybody else got any questions for Frank or any points they want to make?
Guys, I want to thank you very much for inviting me. As I said at the outset, it's a real honor. Anytime someone will spend some time to listen to you and also to engage with you, it's a real treat. And so I always felt like at the end of a semester, I'd tell students, you may want your money back after I say this, but I may have learned more from you than you learned from me. Because if you'll listen to the questions you're asked about something, it helps you shape that. So thank you once again. and I'll try to get you a good speaker. I may be able to get Bob Howell to do one, Chris. I happen to know he owes me a favor, and he's available.
Well, thank you, Frank. Frank, look, that's been amazing. You spent a lot of time with us tonight. You made some really good points, lots of information you passed there. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Frank, for spending that time with us and passing on your expertise there. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Take care.
And guys, thank you all for
one to each of you
joining tonight, and wish you all to stay safe and well. And we'll try and do it all again very soon.
Yes.
Well done, Chris.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you, Frank.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you much, Frank. Good night. Take care.
Yes, Frank. Thanks very much.